I'm Trevor with Pin Performance. This video is going to deep dive into everything Omega. Last year we released the original Omega rail braces. Originally I'd only designed what became the 146 length, which is this right here. I had a hunch that that was all that we needed to stabilize the rail, but my inbox told me otherwise. So I made the 146, the 154, and the 165 lengths. After a season of testing between the hill climb race team and backcountry riders, we ran 146s on every length of rail and didn't have any failures here in the middle. Once you strengthen this middle portion up and you stabilize everything, the next failure mode is up here in the front between the casting and the extrusion. Most of those failures occur when you're in a wheelie that puts a lot of pressure on that portion. The reason it bends right here is because of its lack of torsional rigidity. So the rail itself is really strong vertically, so any like vertical impact, it actually handles it super well because it's really tall. It's like a 2x4 or a floor joist. You put it vertically and you get a lot of strength, but when you put it on its side or you twist it like a TJI, for my framers out there, if you twist a TJI, it'll twist, but if you place it perfectly vertical, it has a ton of strength, like an I-beam, which is what a TJI is. So this rail has a ton of strength vertically, but if you ever looked at it, it's really skinny, which is the whole point of the Alpha. So any push side to side or twist, it just doesn't have a whole lot of strength, which is the reason we came up with the Omega FI. So we're going to quickly go over the differences between the Omega FI and the original Omega. The Omega FI is the same length. It extends to the same point in the rear as the 146 brace from last year did. But the Omega FI extends into the front casting and fits in like a puzzle piece. So the differences are the front casting integration and the ability to integrate the rear coupling system, the Omega FI rear coupling system. The 146 rail braces were super stout. They had some slots milled on the front side and everything was flat on the back side, and they weighed 3.9 pounds. Now the Omega FI, ultimately the same length, a little bit more material on the front to tie into the front casting. 3.3 pounds, so give or take a half a pound. So on the Omega FI, instead of milling on the front side and taking away material here, we left this smooth. We pocketed on the back side, which left material further away from the center and actually lightened these up, as you saw, compared to the 146 Omega braces. And obviously they're way lighter than the 154 and the 165 braces. The 165s are .1 pounds, so they're pretty heavy. So anything past this point, it was kind of a lot of dead weight. It's very rare to see a failure here. When we did the FEA analysis on the Omega FI rail braces, we did it at a point where there was the least amount of material, which is this right here or up here, and we're seeing close to tripling the torsional rigidity. So the Omega FI is actually stronger and lighter than the original Omega rail braces were. The reason the Omega is milled and shaped the way that it is because you have to put mass away from the center in order to increase the torsional rigidity, which is just the resistance to twisting. And This rail, like I said, is super strong with a perfectly vertical hit and impact, but the failures that I've seen, I've heard, I've talked to, it's guys saying that they're in the trees, they're in the snow, they're in the deep, and they come out and they notice that their rail is tweaked. And the reason that's happening is because when you're underneath the snow, there's a lot of pressure. You can imagine if you're on a side hill, you are putting pressure. Like if your uphill is this way, rail flexes this way, and if it gets hit, it's a lot like a pop can. If you stand on a pop can and you dent the side, it collapses. So it's very similar to a buckling phenomenon. It's not necessarily that you go off a giant jump, because if you go off a giant jump and you land perfectly straight, which I've seen, I'm sure a lot of you have seen, a lot of you have done and not had an issue. It's the off camber hits, it's the off angle, it's the twisting, it's the weird stuff that causes this rail to fail. And obviously, if you go off a big jump and you land a little sideways, the chances of bending this rail go up significantly. So the purpose of the rail brace, the Omega FI rail brace, is that it puts mass away from the center. You can only put so much mass in the center to make it torsionally strong. If we think about trucks, older trucks had smaller diameter steel drive shafts. The newer trucks have larger diameter aluminum drive shafts that are lighter. And the reason is because if you push that material away, it can withstand more twisting than if you basically have to pack a ton of material into the middle in order to compensate for what material away from the center would do. So just imagine a 6-inch diameter drive shaft that's made out of aluminum versus the 3-inch diameter drive shafts that are made out of steel. They have the same torsional rigidity, but one is way heavier. Like I said, when we did our FEA analysis, we're roughly tripling the torsional rigidity of the rail itself, which is key to making this rail live. So now that we've gone over what the Omega FI is and the differences between the original Omega, I want to show the similarities between the two. We kept the whole pattern the exact same. So if you had a 146 Omega rail brace, you can take a Omega FI rail brace and directly swap it using the same holes. The difference between the 154, 165, and the 146 is just that there were extra holes behind. So the Omega FI integrates into the front casting, which helps eliminate the delamination of the rail from the front casting, and it allows integration of the Omega FI coupling system. The reason you need the Omega FI brace with the coupling is because the coupling arm actually rivets into the brace itself. On the back side where it's pocketed, this rivet goes down into here. So for those asking if they can run the coupling without the brace, it's just not how it was designed. I'm sure you could take a chance and just use these rivets only, but making sure that it's positioned right, I can't guarantee anything when you do that. So a quick summary of the Omega FI brace and the full system. The Omega FI is one length. It works for all lengths of rails because we found that there were no issues if you ran what was the original 146 length, a 154 and a 165, and that's the same length that the Omega FI is. The Omega FI has the same hole pattern as the Omega 146, and it ties into the front. It helps eliminate the delamination failure that happens after strengthening up the middle portion. It also allows integration of the rear coupling system, the Omega FI rear coupling system, and works with the Omega FI rear pivot arm. The Omega FI rear pivot arm works without the brace. You don't need the Omega FI rear pivot arm to work with the coupling system. The coupling system was actually designed on a stock arm, so it is not a necessity to have the rear pivot arm if you're running the coupling system. It's a good idea to run a stronger rear pivot arm than the stock arm. The stock arm is brittle, and you do put a lot of point stress on your rear pivot arm because of the bump stop. So quickly, the rear coupling arm easily adjusts. You can spin it all the way in to run stock. You can take the nut off and drive that all the way in. You can take this out if you want to really lock it out. You can run the aluminum spacer that it comes with to give it some strength. I just use a Leatherman. So that is super locked out depending on where you run your suspension at. But it's super easy to adjust. It's a 9/16, so if you have that wrench on you or just pull out a multi-tool, super simple to adjust. It's a super simple system. You can go from stock to locked and anything in between, depending on your conditions, your preferences, the power that your sled makes. The rear pivot arm works without the brace as well. It's a stock for stock fitment. The only difference is it has upgraded bushings that have a lower coefficient of friction than the stock bushings. You just use your stock aluminum spacers that go on the bore, and that's it. Quick tip for installing any arm: don't crank your through bolt down very tight. Get it so it doesn't rattle, but don't crank it down, and it will allow your pivot arm to rotate smoother. For those that have the original Omega 154 and 165, we have the original Omega rear coupling system. It only works with the 154 and the 165 because it's cut out so that it fits in the slots and extends further than the 146 does. If you have any more questions, would like us to go into more detail on any aspect regarding this system or any of our products, you can ask them down below, or you can get a hold of us through our website or through social media.